You will marry the beggar at the crossroads inn, or you will marry no one and starve. Sir Hugh Farrow told his niece across the breakfast table, and the man he called a beggar sat very still in the corner of the room and let the insult pass over him like weather. His name, the name he had given them, was Silas. He had come to the district a month before, a lame stranger with a stick and a limp and a coat gone thin at the elbows, and had taken lodging at the crossroads inn and worked what small work a man could get who could not walk without pain. What none of them knew, not Sir Hugh with his debts and his cruelty, not the frightened girl at the table, not a soul in the whole gossiping district, was that the lame beggar at the crossroads inn was Roderick, Duke of Ivelmoor, one of the greatest men in the kingdom. Moving quietly through his own scattered lands in the plainest clothes, he owned to learn with his own eyes what his stewards had been hiding from him. He had come to Farrow's district because the rents there had risen threefold in 2 years and the tenants were being turned out onto the roads, and he had wanted to see the man responsible. He had seen him now. Sir Hugh Farrow was a bully who had gambled away his own fortune and meant to mend it with his niece's small inheritance, which he could not touch until she married, and if she married a penniless cripple, why, then Sir Hugh would manage her money as her guardian in perpetuity. And no husband would ever be strong enough to stop him. It was a neat and vicious plan. Roderick had understood it within the hour. The girl's name was Marian. She was perhaps 22, thin from want, with steady grey eyes and a mouth that had learned not to complain. And when Sir Hugh named the beggar as her husband, meaning it as the deepest degradation he could devise, she did not weep or beg. She looked across the room at the lame stranger in the corner, really looked, which no one in that house had troubled to do, and Roderick saw her take his measure, the worn coat, the stick, the limp, and saw her decide something. "Have you a name, sir?" she asked him. Not her uncle, him. "Silas," he said. "And are you a cruel man, Silas?" The question was so direct that he answered it truthfully. "No," he said. "I have been many things I am not proud of. I have not been cruel." Marian nodded slowly. "Then I will marry you," she said, "and gladly, uncle, and you may keep your kindness, since you have so little of it to spare." Sir Hugh, who had wanted her broken and got her composed instead, went red to the ears. But he had what he wanted, and he was not fool enough to argue with a bargain in his favour. The banns were read, and Roderick, Duke of Ivelmoor, who had come into that district to catch a thief and had never once intended to take a wife, found himself standing 3 weeks later in a cold country church, leaning on his stick, marrying a penniless girl who believed she was throwing herself away on a beggar to spare herself something worse. He could have stopped it. At any moment he could have straightened up and named himself, and ended the whole cruel farce with a single word. He had told himself 100 times that he would. But he watched Marian take his ragged arm and say her vows in a clear, unfrightened voice, this girl who had chosen the poorest man in the room because she judged him kind, and he found he could not bring himself to break the strange, undeserved gift of being wanted for nothing but that. So he said nothing, and they were married, and Sir Hugh gave them the use of a tumble-down cottage at the edge of his land, meaning it as a fresh humiliation, and turned them out to it with the air of a man discarding refuse. The cottage had a hole in the roof and a cold hearth and 1 chair. Marian looked at it in the failing light and did not weep. She rolled up her sleeves and swept it out and begged straw from a neighbouring farm and mended the hole as best she could reach. And when Roderick tried to climb the ladder to help her, she said, quite firmly, "You will do no such thing. Your leg will not bear it. Hold the ladder steady and let me work." He held the ladder. He, Duke of Ivelmoor, before whom lords bowed, stood in a broken cottage and held a ladder steady for a girl in a patched dress, and thought he had never in his life been given an order that pleased him half so well. She did not pity him. That was the thing that undid him. Slowly, over the days that followed, she saw his lameness plainly. She had to, for it shaped every hour of their strange married life, but she never once treated it as a shame. She learned without being told which tasks pained him and quietly took them for herself, and left him the ones he could do, so that he never felt useless. When his leg was bad in the damp, she warmed a stone in the fire and wrapped it and pressed it against the ache without a word of fuss, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world to care for a man's hurt. When neighbours whispered, for they did, cruel about the lame husband and the poor foolish girl, She faced them down with her chin up and told them her husband was a better man than any of them, and that she would thank them to mind their own affairs. "You need not defend me," Roderick told her one evening, ashamed and moved in equal measure. "I am not worth the quarrel." Marion set down the shirt she was mending. "You are my husband," she said simply. "And you are kind to me, and you thank me for the smallest things as though no one had ever thanked you in your life. And you never once complain of a leg that must hurt you a great deal. I do not know what you were before you came here, Silas. I do not care. I know what you are now. And I will defend that against the whole district if I must." Roderick looked at this girl who owned nothing, who had been handed to him as an insult, who nursed his lameness and mended his coat, and believed to the depths of her honest heart that she had married a beggar, and understood that he had fallen wholly and irretrievably in love with her, and that he had built the whole thing on a lie. The lie could not last. Roderick had known it from the first, but he had let the days run on, telling himself he was only waiting for the right hour, when the truth was that he was afraid. He had been wanted, for the first time in his life, as a poor man with a bad leg and nothing to offer but himself. He did not know how to give that up. It ended as such things do, without his choosing the moment. A rider came to the district in the 4th week, one of Roderick's own men, a grave older steward who had grown anxious at his master's long silence and traced him at last to the crossroads inn and thence to the tumble-down cottage. He came at dusk, and he swung down from a fine horse in the muddy lane, and he saw the lame man in the doorway in his thin coat, and he went down at once on one knee in the mud. "Your Grace," the steward said, "thank God. We feared you dead." Marion stood very still in the doorway behind her husband, the mending still in her hands. Roderick closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and turned to face her, and there was no more hiding to be done. "Marion," he said, "there is a thing I must tell you, and you will have every right to hate me for it," he told her. All of it, the disguise, the thief he had come to catch, the great house and the greater name, the whole cruel truth that the beggar she had married to spare herself a worse fate was in fact one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the kingdom. He did not spare himself. He told her he had married her under a false name, and let her nurse his leg and mend his coat and defend him to the neighbors, all while knowing she believed a lie. "The lameness is real," he said at the last quietly. "That, at least, I did not counterfeit. A horse fell on me when I was a young man, and it has pained me every day since, and I have let very few people see me lean on anyone. You are the first in 20 years I have let warm a stone for me. Everything else was a disguise. That was not." Marion had gone white. For a long moment she said nothing at all, and Roderick braced himself for the anger he had earned, the sense of having been made a fool, of having given her care and defense and love to a man playing at poverty for sport. But when she spoke, her voice shook not with rage, but with something else. "You let me think," she said slowly, "that you had nothing, that we were poor together, that I was your equal in it." "You were never poor to me," Roderick said. "You were the richest thing I ever found." "I did not tell you because, Marion, in the whole of my life, no one has ever wanted me for anything but this." He gestured at the fine horse, the kneeling steward, the invisible weight of the dukedom. "No one has ever nursed my leg, or defended me to a neighbor, or married me believing I was a beggar and chosen me because they judged me kind. You gave me the one thing my rank could never buy, and I was a coward, and I could not bear to give it back. It was wrong. I know it was wrong. But it was not sport. I have loved you since the day you held the ladder and ordered me down off it." The steward, on his knee in the mud, did not dare to move. Marion looked at her husband for a long, long moment. The thin coat, the stick, the intense dark eyes she had learned in a month of firelight, and Roderick watched her set the two men side by side in her mind, the beggar and the duke, and understood that his whole happiness hung on whether she could see that they were the same. "When my leg was bad in the damp," he said very low, "and you warmed the stone, you did not do that for a duke. You did not know he existed. You did that for a poor lame man you had no reason to love. That man is standing before you still. He has only a great many acres he never asked you to want." Slowly Marion set the mending down on the one chair. She crossed the cold little room to him, and she reached up and laid her hand against his jaw, exactly as she had the first cold night, and said unsteadily, "I told you I did not care what you were before. I meant it. But you are a great fool, Roderick, is it Roderick? And you have frightened me half to death, and if you ever again let me believe you have less than you do, I will warm a stone and throw it at your head. Roderick laughed a broken, disbelieving sound and caught her hand and pressed it to his mouth. Roderick, he said, Duke of Ivelmoor, and the most fortunate man in the kingdom, which I did not know until a girl in a patched dress held a ladder for me. He took her home to Ivelmoor, the true Ivelmoor, a great grey house of 100 rooms, and Marian walked into it on his arm, still in disbelief, a girl who had swept out a cottage with a hole in the roof, now mistress of all of it. But she did not lose her head, and she did not lose herself. Within the month she had the estate accounts spread on the long table and was asking hard questions about the rents, and Roderick, watching her set his steward straight with the same steady chin she had turned on the whispering neighbours, thought his tenants had never had so fierce a friend. As for Sir Hugh Farrow, the Duke of Ivelmoor did not need to raise his voice to ruin him. A quiet word, a called in debt, an investigation into 2 years of stolen rents, and the man who had turned tenants onto the roads and sold his own niece to a beggar for spite found himself stripped of his lands and his standing and left to learn, at last, what it was to have nothing. Marian asked only that he not be left to starve, and Roderick, who would have denied her nothing, granted the cruel man a small cold pension and a great deal of well-deserved obscurity, which was more mercy than he had ever shown a living soul. But that was later. On the first night in the great house, when the fires were lit and the servants gone, Marian found her husband by the tall window, leaning on his stick, looking out over the acres she had never dreamed were his. "Does it pain you tonight?" she asked. "The leg. The damp is heavy." "It does," he admitted. She went and warmed a stone at the great marble hearth, exactly as she had in the cottage, and wrapped it, and brought it to him, and pressed it gently against the old ache, the Duchess of Ivelmoor kneeling before her Duke in a 100-room house, doing the one small tender thing that had made him love her. "You need not," he said, moved past speech. "There are servants for, there is no servant for this," Marian said. "This is mine. It has been mine since the cottage. I do not intend to give it up." And Roderick, Duke of Ivelmoor, who had commanded armies of servants his whole life, and never once been truly cared for by a single one of them, laid his hand upon his wife's bent head and understood that he had gone out into his own lands to catch a thief, and had instead been caught himself, gently and forever, by the one woman in the kingdom who had wanted him with nothing at all.